what Mindy and Ryan did is truly amazing. And much of it is documented in this book that was made by Tom Evans. Over 40 major and minor media sources have covered this. 32 climate conversations in small and large towns. And really getting the word out through the things that you love to do is why Mindy chose to do this. So I'm very proud to introduce Mindy Aller, our climate hero.
Thank you all for coming. This is the first time that I've been doing any part of this presentation without Ryan. So after 79 plus days that we spent together, I have to give a shout out to my friend Ryan that embarked on this journey with me, and I know that it would not have been possible without his help. So the last video I have in here, he gets the last word at the end of the presentation. The idea of low-carbon crossings came from a couple friends, Jerry Yance and Tom McSteen, that were doing training with the Climate Reality Project. And they're both cyclists, and said, why don't we combine this idea of long-distance cycling with conversations about climate change? Cycling is a great way to show a low-carbon way of travel. It's great to show people the possibility, if you want to go long distances, you can. You don't have to go 4,000 miles to do a tour by bicycle. You can do things that are much shorter, too. And I had been thinking about, I wanted to do a cross-country bike ride. At every long-distance trip that I've ever done has always been for some other cause. I figure if I'm going to put my body through this, why should I want to do it for something more than myself. So when Tom and Jerry first introduced this idea of low-carbon crossings to Paul and I said, there it is. That's the trip that I want to do. So it took a couple of years of kind of picking when is the right date. Another thing I would say is there's never a right time to do things. You just pick a time to do things. So I just picked a time and made it happen. And despite having a long time that I couldn't find a partner that wanted to do it with me, I just kept planning. And in June, I met Ryan in Decorah, Iowa, when Paul and I went down there to do a presentation about Citizens Climate Lobby. He wasn't at the presentation, but we decided to go to the co-op there for lunch afterwards. And fortunately, Paul was wearing his Citizens Climate Lobby t-shirt. And he said, hi, I'm Ryan, you must be Paul and Mindy. He was working at the co-op. So we sat down to have lunch with us. And he wasn't thinking about doing a long-distance bike trip. This is the first he'd ever heard of it. He had taken up cycling and bought his first bike this past summer. He decided to do RAGRI with his girlfriend as his first way, which is the Great Ride Across Iowa that the Des Moines Register puts on every year. That was his first introduction to cycling. I've been doing this for about 15 years. I've done trips up to 1,100 miles, so this is the longest one I've done. But a few days after I'd met Ryan, he gave me a call and said, I've been thinking about this bike trip of yours, would you like somebody to go with you? And that was the first of so many times that when something was needed, the right person appeared. He, of course, making the biggest commitment of anyone that we met along the way to do this trip with me. And I'm going to assume that I don't need to tell you that every month we are setting records for the hottest of that particular month anywhere on record in recorded history. And that 12 of the hottest years on record have been in the last 13 years. And I'm not going to talk about the fact that all of these extreme weather events are becoming more and more frequent because of our changing climate, because I'm guessing that a lot of you already know this. And I probably don't need to tell you that there is overwhelming scientific consensus that humans are causing climate change. From the scientists that study climate, they say, yep, it's us. The good news is that means we can do something about it. And I'm not going to tell you about the greenhouse effect, which is a really good thing, because without it, we wouldn't have life on this planet. But we're building up a few too many greenhouse gases that's starting to make it a little uncomfortable around here. And I probably don't need to tell you that it's caused by our burning of fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas, and that we've been burning a whole lot of it since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. But I'm just going to tell you that all of those are reasons why we decided to embark on this trip to spend okay, it wasn't 4,000 miles, and all honestly, it was 3,750 some. We'll never know exactly because our odometers didn't always work quite right, but 14 states for 79 days, having conversations all across the country about climate change. So there we are on day one. The thing I noticed the most in the pictures is how much my hair has grown. And how clean, and for some reason we just look cleaner and younger on the first day. So we started in Seaside, Oregon, because the first part of the journey we were following the Lewis and Clark route. So we started by ceremoniously dipping our tires in the Pacific Ocean, then rolling them through the sand. Really bad idea. It makes for a great photo op, but it took us a week to get all the sand out of our bicycle. So I don't recommend that. And so we had taken the train to Portland. My friend Gary, or now my friend Gary, I'd met him in June as well, and he said, what do you need? And we said, a way to get to the coast from Portland. Done. We need a place to stay when we get there and when we come back to Portland. Done. You know, we'd like to get some media attention. I know the guy who runs the Seaside paper. Done. So he was the first of many, many volunteers that just helped us along the way. And Gary is a former military officer who sees how climate change is really a threat to national security and sees how it's impacting our ability to keep peace around the world and the threat that it has on our troops of having to transport natural gas and having to protect places, or having to transport petroleum and having to protect places where there is oil around the world. So he's very active. That's why he's concerned about climate change and very active with the Citizens Climate Lobby. So we started on the coast, biked a couple days back to Portland, and from there crossed over to the Washington side. This was the one picture I found of our camp setup. We had everything to camp along the way, 2 individual tents and a cook stove and sleeping bags, pads. We ended up camping about 1/3 of the time, and about 2/3 of the time was staying with people, some of which we had connections to. And how many of you are familiar with warm showers? Only some. Warm showers is like couch surfing for bike tourists. It is people actually around the world that volunteer. I've got a place where you can camp in my yard and a warm shower you can use, or most of them gave us a bed and fed us a meal. It was amazing. People we would call the night before that would put us up. It's a fantastic website. So we crossed to the Washington side and followed along the Columbia River, which is a beautiful river. And one of the first nights we're pulling into the campground, and it turns out it only had a couple campsites and they were both full. It's like, it's getting dark, what do we do? And even as we're kind of standing there puzzling, Michael and Sarah say, hey, are you looking for a campsite? You can share ours. We don't need the whole thing. And they had these 2 adorable puppies with them, which made it all the more fun. So, you know, another, over and over, the examples of the overwhelming kindness and generosity of complete strangers, of people everywhere, is really what struck us the most from the whole trip. Another stop was in Walla Walla, Washington, where we met Ormond and Christy. And Ormond has a family farm in Oregon and has put up 5 wind turbines on that farm. And then he proceeded to tell us about a lot of the challenges that he runs into as a small-scale energy producer, trying to sell that energy. And a lot of the rules and regulations are set up for the big energy producers. So it really made us aware of the challenges, and another thing that we need to keep in mind of how do we keep access available for everyone who's producing clean energy to be able to sell that energy. And I'm grateful to Ormond, who has been going through one regulation after another and one court battle and going to see this committee and that committee, and who's really a pioneer in trying to create that access for small energy producers. We did a presentation on the Washington-Idaho border and stayed with Brian and Katie, who are both very quiet, introverted, shy people. He's a math professor, Brian's a math professor, Katie does technical writing. But they're very concerned about what's happening with the environment. Lots of forest fires in their area. They said we were really lucky to be there this year because last year the valley where Lewiston and Clarkston are had been just filled with smoke from all the forest fires around them. So they've started giving presentations, tabling at events, something completely outside of their comfort zone. And having met them, I was so inspired by the way that they were willing to just step out for what they believed in and what they really thought was necessary. It's kind of like, well, if you can do that, I can do that. We went through just the top of Idaho, mostly through National Park and the Nez Perce Indian Reservation. Absolutely gorgeous. Some of the most beautiful country I have ever seen. And a great reminder of the things that we really want to protect because it really is an amazing, beautiful place. And our very first summit was the Lolo Summit, which is on the border of Idaho and Montana. But this was a good picture that actually shows you all the stuff we were carrying on our bikes. So Ryan had chosen the setup that he had a lot more weight in the front. He had his bigger panniers in the front and smaller ones in the back. I had smaller ones in the front, but learned to try and put extra weight in the front because it's much easier to push things up a hill than to pull them up a hill. Something I had never thought of before. So as much as possible, I put more weight even in my smaller panniers in the front. But I only had a rack across the top and the back, so the tent had to go in the back. And we have solar panels. I think Brian's is on the front in this case. Goal Zero donated 2 panels to us and 2 batteries to help us in keeping our phones and our lights. Everything that we could was USB rechargeable so that we could charge it off the batteries. The solar panels turned out not to be enough to keep us charged all the time, but it definitely was a help in being able to do that.
Mindy, before you move, could you talk about your bike a little bit and the story of your 30-year-old Trek?
My bike is a 30-plus-year-old Trek that was my mom's bike originally, that she gave me when I was just out of college. It took me a while to really fall in love with distance cycling, but I did fall in love with it on this bike. So I've probably been about 15,000 miles now on this bike. And the racks were falling apart by the end of the trip, but the bike itself is still in really good shape. A good, solid, early 80s Trek built in Wisconsin with a steel frame.
And how much weight did you carry?
50 to 70 pounds, depending on how much food and water we had for the particular day. Ryan has a Surly disc trucker, so he had disc brakes on his. I still have the other brakes, which we had maybe half a dozen days of rain in 79 days, which is pretty amazing. Yeah. So our first stop in Montana was Missoula, which is the home of Adventure Cycling Association. If you're not familiar with Adventure Cycling, they do tons of maps across the country. So we followed their Lewis and Clark route for the first part up until Omaha. We made our own route across Iowa, and then we followed their northern tier route from Muscatine, Iowa to Erie, Pennsylvania. And then made our own route. Actually, volunteers made our route through Pennsylvania until Pittsburgh, and from Pittsburgh to DC is all trail. So this is meeting with a group in Missoula, and a couple of them that rode out with us in the morning, and this was the first place that we got a front page, well, front page is section B, but it looks like a front page media story. But that picture got reused by multiple media outlets beyond this, so the photographer got some really good coverage. Our worst weather day was crossing Rogers Pass, which is a couple days outside of Missoula. The night before had started getting pretty cold and windy. By the time we got started in the morning, it was starting to rain, then it was sleet, then it was snow. And it started to snow, I'm like, Brian, it's snowing, I love snow, I'm from Minnesota. And pretty soon we were soaked through and freezing. I wasn't quite as enthusiastic about the snow.
What was the timeline? When did you start? And like, when were you there?
Thank you. We started on August 27th from Seaside. This was September 13th that we were crossing Rogers Pass. And a neighboring pass had been closed that day because of snow.
And was there a reason for, how did you decide when you wanted to start?
It actually started backwards. We wanted to get to DC November 13th because the 14th and 15th of November, the Citizens Climate Lobby was having lobbying days. And so there were volunteers from all over the country that were there. So we wanted to end then, and I kind of backtracked to when we would start. Thinking that as a Minnesotan, that's a little snow.
GoPro camera. Cleaning the lens.
The good news was, although it was snowing, it wasn't quite freezing yet, so it was building up on the sides, but the road itself was not icy. But it's one of the many times we just look at each other and say, well, there's no place to go but forward. So we just kept going. We stopped at one point as we were further down to try and put plastic bags over our feet to keep them a little warmer and find the extra layers to put on our hands. I had socks over my hands to keep them warmer. And we pulled into Sims, Montana that night that, according to our maps, had a campground and a bar and a restaurant. It didn't have any of those things, none of them. And we're asking people, we were looking for a place to stay. They're like, I don't know, but there's a football game going on over at the high school. You can see, the whole town is over there because it's a small town. So we went over to the high school football game, and everyone said, you need to meet Dave. Well, it turns out that Dave is the superintendent of schools, and they were thinking he's often let people stay, in the school overnight when it's been cold. And he took a look at us and started talking to us a little bit about what we were doing, and he said, all right, I'm taking you to my house. So he took us to his house. So, we'd never met Dave before. He took us to his house. This is all of our stuff drying out in front of his heater. And you'll see Dave a little bit more later on. We went on to Great Falls, Montana, and this still is my favorite of all the news stories that we have.
Cyclists are traveling the country in order to raise environmental awareness. ABC Fox Montana's Taylor Chase caught up with the two activists as they passed through Great Falls this morning.
Minnesota native Mindy has been cycling for 15 years. Ryan Hall from Iowa just started. They're two very different people, but with the same passion for the environment.
Bicycles, for one, are a lower impact way of traveling. We call ourselves the low-carbon crossings.
Whether it's the bait shop owner in Sims or park rangers up in Glacier, Aller and Hall say they want to make everyone's concerns a top priority in Washington.
And so the pair set off 13 states, 4,000 miles, and just with what they're able to fit on the side of their bikes.
Physical shape. I think I might be losing weight. My hamstring's a little sore today, but you roll with the punches.
Of course, a little music for the ride doesn't hurt any. Hall's personal favorite, Motown. Very positive, with most people agreeing that climate change is happening.
But I know that once we get into cold country and other parts of the U.S., these conversations are not going to be as easy. And I'm also looking forward to those conversations.
Can't force someone to think something that they don't.
And besides, they've already come this far and they can't turn back now.
From here, we go through North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and then Washington, D.C.
The two will be in Helena tomorrow and hope to hit Bozeman by Sunday. Reporting in Great Falls, I'm Taylor.
So Taylor, being in a small news outlet, she is the camera person, the photographer, the editor, and the reporter all in one. So this was all her idea. I told her she's a news artist. She had us doing all these little things so she could take the extra shots of it and put it all together. So, and did you hear it was an ABC Fox affiliate? So we actually made Fox News. Then we got to Helena, and here's Dave again. Dave's girlfriend, Mindy, lives in Helena. And what David told us when we stayed with him was he really wanted to put solar panels on the schools. Well, we went to Helena and to be part of their sun run that was happening. The sun run is a way that they've been raising money to put solar panels. First, they raised enough money to put solar panels on the library, and now they were raising money to put solar panels on their museum. So it's a great way that they're crowdsourcing it. The community is just helping to pay for putting up the solar panels to just get them up there. But there was also a whole solar energy fair, so the Montana Renewable Energy Society and all of these different groups were there. And if anybody would know where to find financing to help him put solar panels on the school, this was the place. So he came to Sun Run, and we introduced him to folks that we had met there, and we're hoping that that will help get some solar panels on the school in Sims and Fort Shaw. As we continued through Montana, we had more news stories in Livingston. The other one is in Big Timber, Montana. We also met a fly fishing shop owner in Big Timber who was a former middle school science teacher. So he said, I completely understand climate change, but it's not something that people talk about in this town, so I haven't quite figured out how to bring it up gently with people. But they're on the part of the Yellowstone River that was closed for almost a month this summer because the temperature of the water got high enough that there was a big bacteria outbreak that killed a whole lot of the whitefish. So they had a huge fish kill. And the fly fishing owners, we talked to another one too that said, stream levels are dropping because there's not as much snow melt. And the water temperature then warms up. That creates increased pressure on the fish. So this had the Yellowstone River closed for a while, but they also, for the rest of the summer, had lots of times when they would restrict fishing. In the afternoon, it would be too warm, so they would only allow fishing in the mornings. And fly fishing in Montana is huge as a tourist industry. So they're really worried about what it means for them. And the reporter in Big Timber was originally from Southern California. She was really excited about doing a story about us. And then she took it to her editor, and the editor said, no, we're not going to print this. But she persisted, and she knew it was actually a Citizens Climate Lobby volunteer in Big Timber that had introduced us to the reporter and got her to come out to do the story. And they strategized a little bit, and eventually they got a compromise with the editor to just put the picture with a caption underneath it. But it does say cyclists, and it mentions the word climate change. And they said this is the first time the words climate change have appeared in their local paper. So it's that little tiny opening, bit by bit. And now Alex, who's the local person in town, knows Mackenzie, the reporter, very well, and they both know Adam, the fly fishing shop owner. Now there's 3 of them to strategize on how do we start more of these conversations in our town. And then there was another one in Hardin, Montana. We spent 2.5 weeks and 800 miles in Montana, so there was a lot of time in Montana. I can't even begin to tell you all the stories from the places that we went. We moved into North Dakota, and our first stop was in Theodore Roosevelt National Park. Ryan had been waxing eloquent about Theodore Roosevelt for a while as we were moving through Montana and Idaho. And well, we have to stay then at Theodore Roosevelt National Park. And we even got to the bison that was standing in the road on the way to the campground. And we weren't so sure we wanted to go past a bison, watching the way that a lot of the cows had freaked out when we were going by. I didn't really want to go past this animal. Fortunately, a pickup truck came by, and we just went along with the pickup truck between us and the bison so we could get to the vehicle before it got dark. And then North Dakota is where we started to hit our first really strong headwinds. Up until that point, we'd had tailwinds most of the time. And so the first day after Theodore Roosevelt, we didn't make it all the way to our planned destination because the headwinds were just too strong and we were moving really slowly. And the next morning, we got up, red sky in the morning, sailors take warning. We should have known we were in for another tough day. But we were trying to make it to Bismarck for a wedding. When I first planned the trip, and I contacted the one person I knew in Bismarck who used to live in Minneapolis, and I said, I'll be there on September 30th. And she says, great, I'm getting married that day. You can come to my wedding. So we were trying to make it to Gretchen's wedding. We ended up calling our host family for that night, who came out with a car with a bike rack so that we could get there. So we could get to the church on time and make it to John and Gretchen's wedding, which was a lot of fun to be there. No, Ryan does not carry a suit in his bike bag. He actually borrowed this from our host family. We got it completely decked out. And we had a great time at the wedding. One of the many times we had to just call for help to get us to where we needed to be to stick to the schedule. Then the Unitarian Church in Bismarck hosted a community conversation for us. So Gretchen, who's the minister at the UCC church, said, well, we're a little busy right now since I'm getting married, but I'll introduce you to the Unitarians. So the Unitarians helped us out. And then we had our picture. This really is the front page of the Bismarck Tribune, because we had a whole bunch of people that were riding with us. From Bismarck, we went to Standing Rock, which I'll get to in a minute. But the most important part of stops like this sometimes are how you, the response you get from the youngest members that are there. So the next day we went to Standing Rock. This was another one of those serendipitous things that had already been on our planned route before anything was happening at Standing Rock. So we were really honored to go there. This was the larger camp. They'd asked us not to take pictures in the smaller camp where we were staying, so I don't have any photos of that. But there were more than 2,000 people there when we were there. And a bus from Minnesota that was leaving the day that we were arriving, that we waved to the buses as they went past us that day. An amazing gathering of people, overwhelmingly peaceful and welcoming of everyone that arrives. People were arriving constantly, and many of them would hitchhike to get there. People felt called to be there, so they would arrive with barely a backpack. That's why they were looking for tents and sleeping bags all the time, because people would just show up without anything that they needed for staying. And everyone is welcome. So it really, a beautiful gathering, and overwhelmingly, it's all about protecting water and protecting water for everyone. And they had regular prayer circles where they were praying not just for those that were there for their own cause, but they were also praying for the people that were driving the bulldozers, and praying for a change of heart, and praying for them because their children would be impacted by anything that happens to the water as well. So it really was a beautiful place to be. And as we left there, that was another day we hit really, really strong headwinds. But thanks to that picture on the front page of the Bismarck paper, and the fact that we were on the reservation, everybody knew us. So we hit headwinds that were so strong that we could barely move forward at even 3 miles an hour. And we knew there was just no way we were going to get anywhere, so we started hitchhiking. And twice, people in pickup trucks stopped and picked us up because they'd seen us on the front page of the Bismarck paper, and they were there to help us out and get us to our next destination. So that actually got us then into South Dakota. And in South Dakota, as we stopped and looked at the map and looked at what our plans were for the next few days, the first place that we had a presentation scheduled was in Sioux Falls, which is quite a ways away in South Dakota. And we finally got smart and we looked at the wind forecast, and we planned our route based on the wind forecast. So the wind was blowing from the west, so we went east. And we had picked out a spot. We were about to have to turn south that day, and we're standing out there in this 30-mile-an-hour tailwind, which is a beautiful thing, trying to read the map, and a car pulls up and stops and says, "Can I help you with something?" And we said, "Yeah, help us find a place 40 miles east of here where we can camp for the night." And he's like, "Redfield, South Dakota." So we went to Redfield. We averaged 20 miles an hour that day, averaged, because we had a 30-mile-an-hour wind pushing us forward. It's quite a treat. You're barely pedaling and the wind is just pushing you along. So that's the good news. It also shows what a great wind resource they have in South Dakota. From South Dakota, we headed into Nebraska, and we stopped to eat, and this time Paul was with us. This was the first of his first 500 miles. He starts talking to a gal who says, I'm really concerned about climate change, but no one else in Nebraska is. And I started talking to Moses at another table, and he says, I'm really concerned about climate change, but no one else in Nebraska is. And I said, that's funny, that lady over there just said the exact same thing. Then we met Carl in Herman, Nebraska later, and he said the same thing. I'm really concerned about climate change, but no one else in Nebraska is. And it really hit me that if there is no public conversation about it, if you're not getting the stories in the newspapers, if no one's covering it on the evening news, and if you haven't heard about it from any of your neighbors, you think you're the only one that's concerned about it. And the truth is that a lot of people are concerned about it. May not know what to do about it, may not be sure how it impacts them yet, but they're starting to be more and more concerned. So at least for a little bit, we could tell a few people that this was important. And then when we got to Omaha, where we have a good-sized citizens climate lobby group, we started telling them this story and helping to reiterate to them of how important their work is in getting letters to the editor, in getting articles in the newspaper, in helping to build that media conversation so that more people in Nebraska don't feel so alone in their concerns about climate change. So this was our ride out then from Omaha into Iowa. We had about 20 cyclists that biked with us that day. Lots of Iowa. We went through southern Iowa. Not all of Iowa is flat, so southern Iowa has lots of hills, but a lot of up and down hills. And the first part of Iowa, closest to Nebraska, in the southwestern corner, is the Loess Hills, which is a lot of volcanic ash that has blown in over thousands and thousands of years. But it makes for land that's not quite as stable. So they do a lot more terracing there to keep their land intact. And we met a farmer who was talking about how important the university extension services had been for them in terms of learning new ways of doing no-till and cover cropping, which is better for the land in that area, but also happens to have a lower carbon footprint. So it was good to hear that they appreciated the extension. And I can't remember this guy's name, but I remember the conversation with him of saying, we asked him, are you noticing anything about climate change? And he said, I hear the old timers talk about these winters in South Dakota or in Iowa, and I've never experienced them. And he said, we're not talking that many years ago, but they talk about how hard the winters are, and that's never been my experience. And he said, that tells me that it's changed a lot. So that was quite eye-opening as a local customer. Then we hit a couple of universities, colleges. We went to Des Moines, and then we were in Pella, where Central College is, and in Fairfield, Iowa, where Maharishi University is. So that was our first interaction with some students that continued later on. In Illinois, we crossed the Mississippi. That's been 22 homes just up that way. And it was the first place we saw a red tree. So these things you never notice until you're away from home that are familiar. So in the Dakotas and Nebraska, when there are trees, which there aren't a lot of them, they're trees that they do have just turn kind of yellow and brown and the leaves fall off. There's none of these reds and orange and pretty golds that we have in Minnesota. So Illinois was the first place that I actually saw a red tree. And it really struck me that I hadn't seen one yet, despite the fact that it was now fall. And this is Sheila, who, her title is administrative assistant to the city of Winona. She runs Winona, it's the city of Winona. And she has done a lot to make the city park really friendly to bicyclists. They put in a shower facility there for cyclists, and it's free camping in their city park. And then she took us out to the bar as well. Took us out for drink. The next morning we went for breakfast in Winona, and had a conversation with these three ladies that were telling us why they were concerned about climate change. We also had a conversation with a couple that said, well, you know, we really think that climate change is a conspiracy of the government to gain control. That's really how they feel about it. But they weren't rude about it, they were very kind about it. We just happen to disagree with you on this. And then she says, but we really need to be taking better care of our environment. It's like, well, we got a lot of common ground to talk about there. And you know, we need to be concerned about what we're leaving for future generations. Okay, let's just not talk about the words climate change and let's continue this conversation. And it was one of the many places we found, and we had a few more conversations with people that weren't concerned or didn't think climate change was a problem. But they continued to be these very polite, respectful conversations. And I just feel that people were hungry for more respectful conversations after going through this election cycle that was a lot of finger pointing and arguing and bickering in our political ads and in the debates, that people were just looking for, you know, that's not what we want to be about. We really want to be having, you know, polite and respectful conversations, and even getting to the deeper level of what do we do about, you know, taking care of things in our country. We met Catherine here too, and it doesn't show up very well because there's so much behind her. She was in one of these historic gas stations along Route 66. But she's holding up her phone with a picture of the youngest of the youngest two twins of her 10 great-grandchildren. And she said, this is why I'm concerned about climate change, because these are the youngest ones, and she thinks about what it is that we're leaving for all of her great-grandchildren. In Indiana, it says, welcome cyclists. This is painted on this backcountry road, as even Francis says, I live in the middle of nowhere. I kept thinking, it's not really nowhere, it's somewhere, but she's got welcome cyclists, cold water ahead, lemonade, and it's painted from both directions along the road, because she lives along the northern tier route of Adventure Cycling's route. So she, all summer long, is out there stopping cyclists to offer them a cold drink or putting people up. We stayed with her. She's one of the warm showers hosts that we found. And we stayed with them in Indiana. They are small farmers, as they told me. They only farm 800 acres. And by the standards in that area, they are small farmers. And Kevin does most of their farming now on their family land. And he was telling me how much time he spends more than the actual farming is watching the price of corn and soybeans and figuring out the best time to sell their crops and what to do, how long they should hold on to it, how much it will cost them if it's not dry enough to dry it. They don't own their own semi, so how much it would cost them to hire a semi at the right time to sell their crops. It's a completely different business when you're looking at corn and soybeans. And then, you know, we saw fields and fields and fields of corn through South Dakota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio. It wasn't until we got to Pennsylvania that we finally stopped seeing just, you know, as far as you could see corn and soybeans. So it was quite eye-opening to look at. Got to Fort Wayne, Indiana, and they have a great trail system, but Ryan had another flat tire. At this point, his back tire was starting to get pretty worn out and had lots of holes in it. So this turned out to be the last flat tire because Al met us. He was biking by, asked if we needed any help. You know, we really could use a bike shop. Well, I know where the best bike shop is on the trail. He stayed with us because Ryan patched his tire, pumped it up, and it got another hole. So he stayed with us for about 45 minutes while we're patching tires. Then we decided to just try and limp along to the bike shop, and every 5 minutes we'd have to stop and pump up the tire again quick so we could go a little bit further. So we got to the bike shop and finally bought Ryan a new tire, this time a Kevlar tire. I didn't have any flat tires in the entire 4,000 miles. I have super puncture resistant Kevlar tires. I highly recommend them if you're going a long way. It makes all the difference. He had the tires that were just the stock tires that came with his bike when he bought them. And he had 5 or 6 flats, which actually is not bad in 4,000 miles. But Al not only took us to his favorite bike shop where they greet him by name, it definitely was his favorite bike shop, they took care of us, and then he took us out to breakfast too. In Ohio, Ryan's family came to see us. They're in the Michigan and the Detroit area. So his mom and his sister and the dad and the dog came down to see us. And we finally got to see one of the Great Lakes again. And that was really kind of putting the whole trip together from the mountains to the Great Lakes. And in Erie, Pennsylvania, we met Janine, who took great care of us, including she made a connection with Gannon University, found someone to come out and bike with us into town so we didn't have to follow our map, and took very good care of us as we were there. So we hit Gannon University in Pennsylvania, then we went to Allegheny College, and Akeem was riding with us for 2 days. He's a student at Allegheny College, and then we went to Slippery Rock University. So we got to meet a number of students, and at Gannon we had 2 different classrooms that we went to the classrooms and talked to students, and had them all fill out postcards for their legislators. Our last week of the trip, starting in Pittsburgh, that's when Paul joined us again, and another friend, David Holmquist from Chicago, joined us to bike the whole trail. So starts with the Great Allegheny Passage, and then the C&O towpath. It's 335 miles of bike trail from Pittsburgh all the way to DC. And this family also had heard about us and just kind of sent me an email, where are you going to be staying while you're along the trail? We really don't even know yet. But they still came to Pittsburgh to follow along with us. They had kind of homemade pop-up camper. Reese, the youngest, rode with us the most along the trail, and they would bike with us on and off, different members of the family while others were in the car. It was great to have that added youthful energy and the support. At least one night they helped us find a place to stay when we weren't having a lot of luck. This will give you a little sample of how different it was to be on the trail at the end after most of our trip had been on highways and roadways. So it goes up to the Continental Divide, and then goes down all the way from there to DC. One of the many tunnels.
Is this old railroad bridge?
The first half of it is the Great Allegheny Passage is. And then this is the towpath, so there's a canal from Washington, D.C. to Cumberland, Maryland. And this is the old towpath where the donkeys and the horses would pull the barges along the canal. And I don't know if you could tell how much bumpier it is. So the Gap Trail, the Great Allegheny Passage, is crushed limestone and an old railroad bed, and it's nice and flat with maybe an occasional hole. The towpath is a dirt trail with some gravel here and there, lots of big rocks, lots of roots, and a number of holes hiding under the leaves. So it's a much rougher trail, but it's still no cars for 335 miles. And you're in the woods, and it's absolutely gorgeous. It's a beautiful, beautiful trail.
So did you use the same tires on all those different surfaces?
Yeah, yeah. So we had as wide tires as we could get. I think mine were 38 millimeter tires, knowing that we would have that at the end. But by then, we were so used to our bikes that we could put up with a lot. So we ended up hitting Maryland and also West Virginia. So we had a bonus. We ended up hitting 14 states, and we thought we'd only hit 13 because the trail took us into West Virginia, and we did our presentation at Shepherdstown too. Thanks to Pat at this end, who we met at the wedding in Bismarck. And she said, "You should come to Shepherdstown. I live in Shepherdstown. I'll help you set something up." So she was one of them. Our very last morning, we were camping, and I don't know how well you can see the frost on the bike in the morning. It was pretty chilly that night. We were really glad it was the last night. But there aren't any, the towpath is fairly remote in just small towns around there, and there are not many hotels. We were even willing to pay for a hotel, but there's nothing within 10 miles of the path. So if you go 10 miles out of the way and 10 miles back, that's an extra almost 2 hours. So we can't. And then had a bunch of people to meet us. People met us at 14 miles, 8 miles, and 4 miles out from DC to bike in with us. So this is as we're coming along the mall towards the Capitol with all the different cyclists that have done this. And there was a whole bit of more that were there to greet us. Many of them were volunteers that we had met along the way that had been part of setting things up along the way. So Kristen from Montana was there, Gary from Portland was there, I can't remember who else, and others from Minnesota, but I know there were other people that I'm forgetting that had helped in setting up conversations all along the way that then were all there in DC to meet us at the end. And so we spent the next couple days lobbying. We had people fill out these postcards along the way. We had almost 400 postcards that people had handwritten that went to all different legislators. So we gave them to some people that had meetings, and then the last part of the day I spent delivering them to the few places where we didn't have meetings, going to the offices and delivering these postcards. So there was just one lobby meeting that Ryan and I were together, otherwise we split up to different ones, so that we both met with our own legislators, but then with some of the other states that we went through, so we could add to, with the constituents that were there, more of the story from their state. So we were working with Citizens Climate Lobby all along the way. I want to leave time. Do people have questions? Otherwise, I can keep going with this piece, but I want to make sure that I leave enough time if people want to.
During the election, do you hear much people talking about Hillary versus Trump and like looking at line signs and like what was your experience of the candidates in the election being out of the trail?
Most of what we went through was rural areas, and we clearly saw far more Trump signs. We saw very few Clinton signs, and lots and lots and lots of Trump signs, including the Trump card pumpkin and handmade signs that people had made. So it was, at least in rural areas, it was clear where the support was being expressed. But yet, you know, just because someone voted for one candidate over another, it doesn't mean that they bought into everything that that particular person stands for. I don't think in any case of who they voted for. So over and over we would hear, you know, yeah, I might be voting for Trump, but that doesn't mean I don't care about climate change. Some of them did, you know. So there were, you know, lots of conversations to be had. Citizens Climate Lobby, just all of those personal and community actions are really important, but if we don't change policy at the same time, we can't move fast enough. And that's why we work with Citizens Climate Lobby to put a price on carbon and refund that money back to households. And that's what we were advocating for when we got to Washington, D.C. And we have chapters all over in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and across the country. So we heard a lot of, I mean, people were receptive to various conversations. When we would do presentations, most of them were people that were already interested in climate change, because when you put out an advertisement for cyclists, you know, working on climate change, that's who comes, are the people that generally agree with that. That's why the media that we got was far more important, because that reaches a lot more people that might not otherwise have been talking about climate change. It's a slow process, but definitely once we got to DC and we were doing all these lobby meetings, we had, as a group, we had over 300 lobby meetings, many with Republican offices, many of them that are open to the conversation and are asking questions about our fee and dividend policy, which being a revenue-neutral, market-driven solution is one that more conservatives are willing to listen to. So there are a lot of conservative offices that aren't necessarily talking publicly yet about climate change, but they're watching the way the trends are moving. They're hearing from their constituents. They need to hear from more, but they are looking for possibilities. And the House of Representatives now has Climate Solutions Caucus, started by Carlos Cubello, a Republican from Florida, along with his Democratic colleague, Ted Deutsch. Carlos overwhelmingly re-won his seat in South Florida as a Republican, talking very vocally about climate change because he said we can't ignore it in Florida. He's one of the first that has been willing to speak out on it, and I'm very grateful to him for that. There are 10 Republicans and 10 Democrats that are on this caucus. 7 of them won re-election of the Republicans. One of the Democrats, one of the Republicans retired, and 2 of the Republicans did not win their seats. But they have already started talking about climate solutions. So the conversation is starting, and it's even starting to be more vocal in the Republican Party, but they need to keep hearing from more and more people that are concerned about it, because they need to know that their constituents will support them when they start talking about it.
And what has happened since the election is just the number of people visiting our website and the number of people on our introductory call has increased tenfold in 2 weeks. We usually have 20 people on the national intro call every Wednesday night. Last week, 200. So now is the time to really reach out. If you're interested and not engaged, get engaged. If you're engaged, reach out to your friends and give them our information. We're really building right now this movement, and it's an opportunity for people to see that we can't expect the top leadership to lead anymore, and we have to push from the bottom.
I feel like in so many conversations about climate change, and this one today, there's like this elephant in the room that nobody talks about. And this gentleman over here got a great list of things he missed it too. I challenge you to mention what is huge thing that's affecting climate change. I don't really even mention population. Cars.
Population was the other way.
Cars, population, but nobody's really talking about what we do. In fact, everybody's driving everywhere. I mean, and that's what's great about your trip, of course. But you demonstration. Oh, you did say something about this is another way we can travel without cars. But I just feel like it's this giant thing. Everybody just assumes, well, that's just hey, cost of my business. It's like, along with all the people that die in cars, it's just the cost of doing business, climate change, and all the deaths.
Well, I wanted to share good news about the Twin Cities could be pretty much free of gasoline-powered transportation within 20 years. Basically, the state of Minnesota has a climate action plan that calls for electrifying transportation. You can go to the Environmental Quality Board website. And so basically, how many people live in a suburb? And how many people live in Minneapolis or St. Paul? Minneapolis and St. Paul have adopted the UN goals for reducing carbon, and we'll be having excellent climate action plans developed over this year. But we're trying to get a number of suburbs to do that as well, to have more compact development where you don't need to drive as much, really having development along all the light rail and BRT, and then having, we can get some electric buses now for the Met Council through the Volkswagen settlement dollars. And then there will be some electric cars as well. But a lot of young people really don't like to drive, as well as people getting older can't drive. So we have a good chance of being able to switch away from the cars that we need transportation.
I just want to, I know there's another group that will come in here, so I just want to be respectful of that and officially draw this part to a close, but I'll still be here and can either answer questions up here or out in the hall afterwards.
So my name is Ryan Hall. I'm originally from Detroit, but I'm representing the great state of Iowa. And I just got involved in CCL when I met somebody in June who kind of coerced me into doing this cross-country bicycle trip. And so we know who the culprits are. They're Mindy and Paul Thompson. So you can thank them for getting me involved. And so So I remember being on Capitol Hill in 8th grade, you know, taking the stereotypical field trip that most students do nowadays. And the essence of DC was a lot different this time around. And I really felt that being part of this community and bicycling for climate solutions, for taking action, for finding community, building community, really came to play when we stepped on the hill today. And I'm really impressed by the work that CCL does and will continue to do, and by those very relationships that we have with one another and with our elected officials. So I'm happy to report that in every Republican meeting I had with my elected officials in Iowa, they went pretty darn well. I think there is a tide that is shifting in Congress, and can you feel it? Yeah. I can feel it. It's coming around, you know? So I feel really hopeful about what the future has to offer, the future of CCL, the future of how people engage politically, and this is a wonderful example of how we can do that. So I had an amazing first experience on Capitol Hill,